All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of the Power to Pivot podcast. I cannot wait to share today's guest with you. Donna W. Guthrie is joining me today. She is an author, a playwright, and the author of, I'm so excited, it's a kid's book for about Shakespeare. It's called Flibbertigibbety Words, Young Shakespeare Chases Inspiration. Donna, how are you?
Just fine, just fine.
So excited to have you here. I love this book. It is colorful, bright. It's this beautiful picture book about Shakespeare.
Yes, I'm very happy with it. I'm happy with the illustrator. She did a wonderful job.
How did you come to write this book?
Well, I came to write this book because I'm a grandmother and I've
Mhm,
been writing for a long time. This is my 25th book, I think.
mhm,
Fifth. So I happen to be a fan of Shakespeare, and my husband and I have attended a number of Shakespeare festivals. And as a looking for a book to to send home, a lot, probably a T-shirt too, but definitely a book. So I went into, I was out at Cedar Springs in Utah at the Utah Shakespeare Festival out there, which is in southern Utah, very well known. And the bookstore had a number of children's books, but for, I would say, third grade and up.
mhm,
And I went through the whole thing and I thought, you know, we need a picture book. We need a book for our very youngest reader.
mhm.
And it so happens that I had played around with this idea years ago. And this is my advice to all writers: don't throw anything away. You never know when you never know when you need it. So I went back to my files, and lo and behold, when I got my MFA at the University of Vermont in children's and young adult literature, and I remember the story about Shakespeare. Basically, the first line is William opened the window and words flew in. And so this idea of the words, the story flying into your window. And in the story, William chases it all around Stratford and Avon, trying to grab these words, trying to pick them up and hold them. And he's passing by all the future characters he's going to be in the plays, like Romeo and Juliet, the three witches from Hamlet. So I did take this to my writing group when I was in graduate school. And, it fell flat. I read it to people. They just didn't see it. They didn't understand it. They didn't understand that the words would constantly be floating on the pages. Maybe I didn't explain it well. Maybe I didn't read it well that day. Anyway, I got such a blank review, I just put it away. Now, here's the good part: I didn't throw it away, I put it away.
Mhm.
And after this trip out to this Shakespeare Festival, I said, where is that? And I brought it out again and took a look at it and could see where it could be improved and what could be added, and sent it out over the transom. Because at this point, I had not been writing children's books. I've sort of been involved in video and documentary making. So I hadn't really published a children's book in maybe 15 or 20 years,
Mhm.
and sent it out over the transom. And lo and behold, the editor calls me up and said, I really like this book. I'd like to work with you on this. This is Page Street Publishing, and which is part of Macmillan. And so she laughed at me. She said, I really like working with new writers. Are you a new writer? And I said, well, in this century, I am. Last century, I published a number of books, but this century, I'm a new writer. Anyway, we worked together, and the key part was finding the illustrator for the book, because the words float across it, and the words are words from future plays.
Mhm.
And so it's written on two levels. It's certainly a picture book, but for that parent or grandparent who's reading the book, they would quickly pick up the two gentlemen from Verona, and they would notice that there was the graveyard. That when William's running through the street, you would see scenes from future plays. So it was always on two levels. So it was really important to get the right illustrator.
Mhm.
And times have changed in publishing. Years ago when I've published a number of books, but I've never had the opportunity to choose the illustrator or even speak to the illustrator. I mean, they've always kept the illustrator and the writer very far apart, because if you could imagine, if I was too forceful with my ideas, that could get in the way of the illustrator's creativity. Okay,
Right, right.
that was
Yeah.
that was their, yeah, that was their thought.
So, so it really sounds, this is like a pivot back into children's books for you then.
Yes, it is.
And now here you are. I think it's funny that in one way that you're saying like it's your first book this century. I mean, things have sort of taken, the illustrator is one key point where this is like almost like a new framework for publishing now. What was
Yes.
it like for you? Were you afraid? Like, did you kind of go into this anxious or were you excited? Was it a mix?
Well, I was excited, extremely happy, because I haven't really been, I've been very much involved in video making and documentary filmmaking for the past few years. And I don't know if the word's fluke, but I'm proud of myself that I took the chance because I knew that, I mean, there's so many people writing out there and so many things, being submitted. The fact that I did it without an agent, I just took a chance. And
Yeah.
and the right person picked it up. So I was saying mainly excited. And then when Page Street gave me the opportunity to look at a number of illustrators and help them, I wouldn't say that I made the choice, but I would say that I had input, which was very unusual for me. And it makes sense. I mean, to me, there's always been a rule about keeping illustrators and in the past and writers separate, but I think I had an idea for the book, and surely when I saw Asa's illustrations, I thought, oh, she's the one. And so did the editors. We all agreed. I mean, this is the way it should look. It has to be lively, it has to be colorful, and the words have to be an integral part of the illustration.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. That's one of the things that I love when I look at the pages. They're like floating, as you
yeah,
said, and it it gives like a lightness and like this lightheartedness to it. And when we think of Shakespeare's plays, I'm a huge Shakespeare fan myself, but they're not always the lightest of content, although there's a lot of humor in them.
yes,
But
yes, it would be hard to choose it. So I that's the way I wanted to go into it. I wanted to, and the story basically is about creativity and how creativity comes to someone. And I think sometimes it floats past, and you want to grab it. You want to hold on. And where in the book I was trying to explain, it takes patience and time and thought to create a story.
I love that because when I'm thinking about what you're saying, right? I know for me as a writer myself, wanting to reach for that inspiration and that creativity, you can almost push it away if you try to pull it too hard towards you, right? And I think about you and how this story came to be. You could have continued to work it when you originally wrote it, but it wasn't time. And in the meantime, you went and you did other things, and then you allowed it to come back to you.
Yes, and then I do think there are times where an idea just sort of floats in and it's right, and you put it down on paper and it sells. But that's not been my experience. My experience is to get it out as quickly as possible, and then uh, it sort of ferments for a while. I think that's the word. I think about it. It's sort of always in the back of my mind,
Mhm.
and I work on it. Writing a good children's book is like writing a good poem. Every word means so much. I mean, we have such limited words. We have limited words and limited space to tell the story. You know, a beginning, a middle, and under 700 words, and that
Mhm.
takes time and thought. And it's best if it's done slowly, I think. But that's just my writing process. That's not everybody's writing process.
It's interesting because I never really thought about that, right? I mean, I have kids and I have read picture books but it never occurred to me the limited that you are limited in the framework of the vocabulary for who you're talking to is so small compared to, you, if you're writing for an adult, it's going to change, and you have to tell this story within this limited framework and still
Right, and
make
the and the
it.
main character and the
Does
main
it?
character has to change in some way. So we
Yeah.
always know that the main character is, but so just like a regular story, we have to see an arc somewhat where the main character goes up against it has to do some problem solving and change by the end of the story.
Yeah.
So keeping that in mind in most picture books, um, And also for me personally, I like to keep it under 850, 900 words. Now that's mine. I know that there are longer picture books, and nowadays there are lots of short picture books.
Mm-hmm.
With a grandson, I read a lot. I have read a lot in the past 6 years of children's books. So I feel, and that's what one of the other clues about writing for children is to read a lot of children's books, to
Yeah.
stay current, to see what's being published now.
Before we go further, what age group would you recommend Flibbertigibbety Words, Young Shakespeare Chases Inspiration
I think
for?
four to, I think 4 to 7. Four
Four
to
to
seven is the
seven.
Mhm.
And where can we find the book?
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, independent bookstores will be happy to order it from you. I want to encourage independent bookstores because we want to keep them open. So your favorite bookstore will have it to you in a couple of days.
Okay,
So,
great. Guys, it really
and
is a
yeah,
beautiful book. Go ahead. What were you going to say? I'm sorry.
thank you. And please check out my website, donnawguthrie.com. There's lots of children's books there. And actually, I have recorded many of them. And so you can look at them ahead of time if you want. You
I
can
love
just
it.
have them. Yeah. So I've done that.
So
Yeah.
here we are. We're
So
recording this mid-April. Shakespeare's birthday is coming up in a couple of weeks. Actually, this
yes.
episode will probably air on his birthday, April 23rd. How can we start to celebrate Shakespeare? Like, I'm thinking about, I work in education. Um, what's one step? I mean, certainly we can introduce the book and read the book, but really, how can we start to bring this even further in the classroom and at home and really celebrate what Shakespeare has done for us?
I think maybe we could start with some of the famous sayings of Shakespeare.
Mhm.
Maybe we could start with some of his sonnets. Maybe that would be easier for younger people to approach Shakespeare in that way. Talking a little bit about his life and the fact, just discussing him as a playwright, that he lived 300 years ago, and we're still doing his plays. Talking about the man himself and the fact of the staying power of his plays.
Mhm.
Um, even if you don't go into the depths of them, because they've been so many popular movies have been based on Shakespearean plays. Um, and so I think they've been, done over and over again. And they're talking about the staying power of one writer. I think that's kind of an interesting idea.
I love that.
Um,
Why it brings up a question for me as a Shakespeare fan. What makes you see him as being such an iconic, like he's the guy, right? He's been around for
he is
hundreds
the
of
guy.
years.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
why? Because I also think
Good.
about sitting in high school English class going, oh my God, this is so hard. It can be frustrating to read if you don't, but somehow his works have stayed around.
Right. And even when I go to Shakespeare's plays, it takes me a few minutes to get my ear back listening to the phrasing and to the poetry of Shakespeare's words. Even now, and I like Shakespeare a lot. I think he's got a master storyteller and a master creator of characters that we care about.
Hmm.
And um, and one of the things of how many different ways that you can do Shakespeare. Like I've seen Romeo and Juliet done with sort of a Greece background, sort of a 1950s motif. There's so much freedom for the actors and the directors to use Shakespeare. I think that's why there's so much staying power. You can be so creative with
Hmm.
his stories.
I love that. Let's switch gears for a minute. So, as you mentioned, you've written multiple children's books. You've written, this would make it 24, right?
Yeah, 24, I think
Oh
it's
my
right.
gosh.
Yeah.
So,
I just had a new book accepted. It's coming out. So that's the 25th. I think you're right.
yay! Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Um,
And, and this is, I don't know if I got to tell you, but Liberty Jibbity Words is now a finalist for the Colorado Book Award. I live in Colorado. So thank
congratulations.
you. I'm
That's
very happy
exciting.
about that. Yeah.
What is your secret? Like, I'm thinking about this going, I've written three personally, not picture books, and I'm going, you know, I think there's more in me, but how do you challenge yourself creatively as an author?
That's very interesting.
Or how, I guess, where do
Yeah.
you find that inspiration to keep
Yeah. keep
moving the
going.
pen and you just keep going.
Yeah. Um, I'm filled with ideas and not always picture books. I'm very interested in documentary filmmaking. I've done, um, two, I'm on my third animated film. I've done 2 or 3 documentaries. So I feel like that creative spark is, I'm lucky. I feel like it's there. Sometimes for me, it's, focusing and choosing what I'm really going to work on.
Hmm.
Um, because life gets in the way.
Yeah.
What is my inspiration? I I find the world very interesting, and I find the world very interesting, and I read a lot. I think that many of the ideas come from what I read, the newspaper.
Hmm.
I'm working on right now a play about women sea captains.
Oh,
But in
wow.
the 1800s, yeah, I've done some playwriting, and I would like to do this play about women sea captains and combine it with sea shanties.
Mm.
Because I just read it during COVID, sea shanties came back. That
Hmm.
people started writing sea shanties on TikTok, and I thought, oh my gosh, which brought me back to some books I've read about women sea captains. I thought, wouldn't it be kind of an interesting play to mix sea shanties with the stories of women sea captains?
Hmm.
So that's what I have 9 or 10 books on my desk right now about sea cap women who sailed seas or lighthouse keepers. So I think the world gives me ideas. I think just staying awake and staying curious.
I
I
think
think that might be worth it.
that's really powerful right there because, it's so easy to get numbed into and distracted by everything internet and, whatever, just the fact that you're so willing and curious about the world, like you're willing to just observe and you can grab a story from there. I'm
Mhm.
kind of wondering, so something that I have seen and have been asked is, should I write what is current and relevant for now, or do I write what I want to write? And do you think it's one or the other? Is it a mix of both?
For me, is probably I write what I
Mhm.
want to write. But I understand as a young working writer, I will say this when I'm thinking about an idea. I actually do look if the story's already out there.
Mhm.
Um, for instance, I love the poetry of Emily Dickinson,
Mhm.
but a book just came out last year about Emily Dickinson, so that would make me not necessarily think
Mhm.
about writing about her. So I understand both sides of it. Uh, at this point in my career, um, I probably write what I want to write.
Mhm.
And but I can understand when you're trying to get published right at the beginning, looking around, especially for fiction or nonfiction, to look around and say, okay, what book is missing? What book is not there?
Mhm.
And that's happened where Shakespeare came from. That book, I couldn't find the picture book, so I
Mhm.
decided to write one.
I love
So,
that you're like, well, that's it. I'm just going to write it on myself. And there
but
now we
this,
have this beautiful book. And I just think it speaks so much to a lot of different things, right? You didn't give up. You weren't willing to take no for an answer. You're like, I see this need out there and we're going to create it and make it happen. Um, and you just keep finding that inspiration to create and to put beautiful things out into the world. Go ahead.
I do, I do, and I have to admit, I think that part about you just mentioned, not giving up. Um, I have a book called Mrs. Gigglebelly is Coming for Tea, which I published in the 90s. I think that book was turned down 27 times. And I just wouldn't give it up. I just knew it was an adorable book. And it ended up being bought by Price and Sloan. And it sold very well for every Mother's Day. In fact, I have a school out in Florida that has been reading it every year for the past 20 years. In fact, I Zoomed with them uh,
Oh,
last Mother's Day. Um, and it just hit the heart of this teacher, and she has this Mrs. Gigglebelly Day, and he reads this book. I tell that story only because the part is don't give up. If you
yeah.
really believe you have a story, sometimes it's just finding that right editor, getting it in front of the right set of eyes.
Mhm.
And that's where I think joining the Society of Children's Book Writers and attending conferences, having a book group, a writers group that you can share your work with, I think that's very important,
Yeah.
especially in your career.
And I think So in your background, I know you were, a mom, you were trying to make it work as a freelance writer, you were a wife, and there came a point in your career where you were like, I don't know where this is going, because you put, like so many moms, I think all of us, put everything else above what you like. That writing was on the back burner for you. um at what point did you go, I can't hold this back anymore, and this is either going to work or it's not? Like, can you take us back to that moment?
Well, my children were little, and I had a 3 and a 5-year-old, and I had been writing for 2 or 3 years, not publishing anything. And I was publishing, I was writing before they got up and when they took naps. And literally, our house, we had a very small house here in Colorado, and there was no place to get away. I mean, because I was writing on the kitchen table. And so one day I realized that there was a closet on our upstairs bedroom that was filled with winter coats. So I took all the winter coats out. My husband put a light bulb, brought an electric light bulb, and he put a board across, literally, so I could, just one board for my electric typewriter at the time. And we put it across the thing, and there was just enough room for me to get into the closet, put my feet under the board, and close the door. And that's probably where I wrote for the first year and a half. And um, and things were getting published as far as stories. I was sitting out to small magazines, and local newspapers I was getting published. And finally, somebody came across the thing that it was the National Society, the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. And they were having a convention in LA, and I was living in Colorado at the time. I mean, the idea of leaving 2 little kids, my husband, and I don't know, going to LA seemed like such a crazy idea. And it was not cheap at the time, but I decided to do it. I just decided that I was going to go for it. I was going to go be with other children's writers and see what the story was. And there was a thing that they said out in the Illustrated, for extra $25, you could send your manuscript out early, and a writer or an illustrator or publisher or an editor would read it. And so I sent out The Witch Who Lives Down the Hall and went to the conference, and lo and behold, it was read by the editor of Harcourt Brace Johanovich. And I had a special meeting with her. We met, and it was like a sign from the universe that I was supposed to. I remember thinking at the time going in, I need some sign that this is what I'm supposed to do. Yes, I want to do it, but maybe I should go back to teaching and help out financially that way once the kids are older. But I really wanted to write, and I met up with the editor and she liked the book, and we made a couple of changes right there. I was very willing to change, a couple of things that she wanted to change. I said, absolutely, I can do that. And the book was accepted. And then when it was, it was a Junior Literary Guild selection, and the school wonderful reviews. It was my first book, and it did very well. And it was sort of my first sign to continue this. And not that I still don't get rejections. I get lots of rejections, but I know that this is what I want to do. And I've zoomed around, I've done podcasts about the history of country western music. I've made over 68 educational videos for kids who are homeschooled. I've written plays. I've written for magazines. So it's been a whole array. But children's writing has sort of been that basis, that bread and butter part of that foundation of my writing.
How do you handle the rejection piece? Because I think it's interesting, like, right, I think to me, right, I go, at that point, I'm glad and appreciate that you mentioned you still get rejection letters. Does it hurt as much as the first one does? Or are you able to be like, all right, next project?
Yeah, no, it does not hurt as much as it did.
Okay.
No, it doesn't. Because I get so many that, like, okay, yes, they don't want it, but that doesn't mean the next publisher won't want it. And sometimes you get really close. Like, I just got an email last week, and like of 1,300 submissions, you were one of the last 10, but I'm sorry, we're not going to publish the book. I mean, that's hard to take.
Yeah, right.
Thank. But no, I just continue, and I find so much joy in writing too.
Mm, I
It
love
you know
it so
there are hard moments, but I feel alive when I'm writing, and thinking about writing.
And that I think is an important piece, right? Because that if you hold on to that passion and that feeling that you get when you are doing it, it almost, not that you're okay with the rejection piece, but it's like that's not all that's there.
That's
You
right.
get that intrinsic, like, I love this and I'm just going to keep writing because you have such a passion for it. And then everything else seems to fall in place.
Yes, so many times the universe sort of lines up.
Mm.
Um, yes, and say yes. I agree with you. But even with the rejections, I probably wouldn't stop writing.
Yeah,
I
and that's
got
important because
plenty.
you had this
Yeah.
dream, you've made it work, and here you are, almost 25 books in for children with all the other amazing things you've created for the world. I'm so excited for you for this book. Again, it's Flibbertigibbety Words, Young Shakespeare Chases Inspiration. Where can people find you if they have questions, or you also do workshops, right? You're doing
I
the
do
Zoom.
I do workshops. I do Zoom workshops. I also visit schools. I've got the skills down now that easily, and I do a whole thing called a Taste of Shakespeare. So we talk a little bit about Shakespeare and why his plays are so important. And there's a study guide that's on my website, donnawguthrie.com, that you can download. And it's sort of it's a set of activity sheets that I think kids will enjoy, and it goes along with the book. So you can download those free on my website.
I've taken a look at the study guide and I think it's a really great introduction. So I've seen kind of the format for the workshop, and especially now I think this is something that would be a great addition to classrooms because, you know, you don't necessarily need to be in person to do it, but you can still have this fun in the classroom and put on plays and get kids really creative and thinking about Shakespeare and language and words and creativity. So I just think it's great.
Great, thank you.
So Donna, any last minute words before we wrap up today?
No, this has been great fun. This is my first experience doing this, and wow, this is exciting.
Oh, well,
It's
thank you
great
so
for
much for
me
joining
to be
us
with
then.
kids.
Oh my God, I'm so grateful for the opportunity and to get a chance to share your work. Guys, check her out, donnawguthrie.com. Where else on social media?
I have a YouTube channel, which is also donnaw.com, where you can see all of my books. So I've recorded them, and it's sort of a story hour so that you can go through it that way. And I'm also on Instagram. Uh, I have to admit to you, I'm still new to this whole social media. This is not the way that, but I'm learning. So that's the best way.
That's okay.
I'm learning.
We will put the links to all of that in the show notes to make sure that people can reach out to you. And guys, just remember, Flibbertigibbety Words, Young Shakespeare Chases Inspiration. It's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Make sure to check it out. Donna, thank you again for joining us today. Remember, we'll close as we always do. You are never stuck, you are never lost, and you are never alone. At any given moment, you can use your power to pivot, make a new choice, and start again. And I'll see you guys on the next episode. Take care.